Lisa and I have only been married a couple of years. It was never in my plans to settle down or form a home with anyone, and I don't think I would dare to have children. Life is complicated enough without kids. If you ask me if I enjoy the advantages of marriage, of course, I can't deny that it's an advantage to have someone in my bed every night and save me the effort of conquering a different one every day to satisfy my urges. What can I say? God made me a man who really enjoys women in every sense of the word. However, I have to confess that I prefer them older. When I was a teenager and we met up with high school classmates to do schoolwork, I took advantage of all the time I was in other people's houses to spy on their mothers. I've always been attracted to the female body, but there is something about mature women that awakens my wild instinct. Over time, I have been able to turn my passion into a way to make a profit. I have always had a gift for drawing, so I paint portraits, and my favorites are the nudes. Having this profession is the perfect excuse to give free rein to the pleasure that comes from looking at a woman's naked body, with the additional benefit that while I paint them, they cannot move or cover themselves. They are completely at my mercy, exposed to me. Lisa doesn't know anything about my preference for older women. When we lived together in London, I'd always look for an excuse to see her without clothes, or I would simply ask her to take off our clothes while we did chores, taking advantage of the fact that we were alone. She used to please me and never saw anything strange in that. She knows that I am also fascinated by her body. Things changed when her father died, leaving Martha, my mother-in-law, widowed and alone in a huge house. Lisa, who is an only child, thought that the best thing would be to move with her to Barcelona, and that way she would always have company. I, who have always had a certain attraction for Martha, logically agreed without problem. Now that we live together in the same house, I have to say that her mere presence is exciting to me, and I have had to make a huge effort not to show the secret attraction I have with my mother-in-law. At night, when Lisa and I show our love in bed, I sometimes fantasize about Martha and imagine that she is the one who slides her hands down my back, kisses me passionately, and asks me to please her like no one has done in a long time. Every day in the morning, Lisa goes to work early. She is a physical therapist, and no one knows the skills she has with her hands better than me. She is successful in doing well, fortunately, because I can't say that I earn much from the paintings I make. However, I am fortunate to be able to work from home, the same house where Martha lives, so I spend a lot of time with her. Martha is a woman who is over 50, but she has always been active and maintains herself very well. In fact, she goes to the gym every day, although I prefer to watch her train at home. When he dresses in those tight spandex pants, I swear to God it lifts my spirits and then some. I have always had to care of my appearances. Normally she usually exercises in front of the television in the living room, and I sit at the kitchen table to drink coffee or pretend I'm reading the newspaper, but I don't take my eyes off her. I'm sure she can feel my gaze. Maybe that also makes her feel attractive, and I love to think that deep down she also likes me looking at her. When the sweat begins to slide down her skin, which barely bears the occasional age spots, I feel like getting closer and tracing each drop with my fingers or my tongue. I'm sure she knows I'm watching her, because when she trains at home she wears tight, light-colored pants, and when she gets wet, I can clearly see everything underneath them, and that image feeds both my desire and this perverse attraction I don't want to repress. With the excuse of getting inspiration to paint, I spend most of my time at home, and I admit that I have done some mischief for the sheer pleasure of it. One day, after her usual training, Martha went into the bathroom to take a shower. It's something she does routinely, and I always watch her carefully, but on this occasion I didn't hear the door latch, and I knew she had left it open. That realization awakened an instinct in me that I didn't want to control. I counted to 10 to make sure she had taken off all of his clothes and entered the shower. So I walked over to the door, and when I heard the water falling, I opened it. I opened it slowly and stealthily slipped into the bathroom. The light from the window perfectly reflected her silhouette in the shower door, and I stared for a few moments, fantasizing about her hand being mine, sliding the soap all over her body, emphasizing the most sensitive parts. Before she could notice my presence, I took the clean clothes she had left on the toilet box and also took the towel. I left as quietly as I entered and closed slowly. Then, I went to her room and arranged everything on the bed like she usually does. Lately, she was complaining about forgetting things, so I thought it was a brilliant idea to set up this whole situation. She would never suspect me, that I am in the studio working, that she would think that she forgot to put her clothes in the bathroom. The best part came right after. I hid at the end of the hallway, behind the wall, where I could see her perfectly when she came out of the bathroom, but she couldn't see me, and I waited. At that moment, I was excited. It was a mixture of nervousness that she would find out what I was doing, and the desire to force her to walk around with her clothes off in front of me, to the delight of my eyes. It didn't take long before I heard the doorknob turn. She carefully opened the door, peeking her head out first. I guess she wanted to make sure I wasn't walking around. Finally, she took a step, and I could see her whole leg dripping water, and immediately the rest of her body came out into the hallway. Her wet figure was simply perfect. She was toned from all the time she spent working out, but the inevitable passage of time was also showing on her skin. I licked my lips and swallowed thickly. The desire I had at that moment to pounce on her and fulfill my fantasy was almost uncontrollable. Then she came to her room and closed the door behind her, but that image would stay in my mind forever, and I swear I remembered it every night for several weeks. On other occasions when we were alone at home, when Martha came home from a walk with her friends or her usual reading meeting in the afternoons, I knew she would go into her room to take off her street clothes and change into something more comfortable. Then I would turn on the TV in the living room or the coffee pot, so she would think I was in the kitchen and leave the door open. But I would sneak stealthily into the room right across from hers and spy on her. I so enjoyed watching her take off every piece of clothing, as if she wanted to give me a show, leaving her skin exposed. Although it was brief, because she immediately put her clothes back on, those flashes of her body came back to me over and over again for the rest of the day and stayed playing on loop for me at night. Lisa worked midday at the rehabilitation center, and in the afternoons she joined an animal shelter as a helper, so she spent all day outside, leaving me alone at home with Martha. During the day I fantasized about situations like the ones I am telling you about, and at night I satisfied my desire in my room with my wife. But I felt that it was not enough. I needed to have her for myself. One Thursday morning, I was trying to concentrate and paint something, but I realized that I had been staring at the blank canvas for almost an hour and nothing else came to mind other than the memory of Martha and the many times I had seen her scantily clad. Just at that moment, she passed by the hallway and, seeing me absorbed in my thoughts, decided to look out the door and ask, "What's wrong? Inspiration doesn't come," she said. I snapped out of my thoughts, shook my head, and let out a soft laugh. "The truth is that I am in need of a muse. Would you let me paint you without clothes?" I replied. Martha opened her eyes with an astonished expression, but I did not regret it. Discretion and decorum were qualities that my parents did not include when they gave birth to me. "Eric, I don't think that's appropriate. I am your mother-in-law," told me. "Come on, Martha. I will be professional. Furthermore, a great body like yours definitely deserves to be immortalized in time. You are very well preserved." I insisted. I knew that if I appealed to her vanity, I would succeed in convincing her. "All right, but I want to keep the painting," she finally responded. I was starting to feel that familiar feeling in my stomach. I broke out in a cold sweat as soon as she let go of her clothes and lay down on the couch. "Spread your legs wider," I asked her, just for the pleasure of seeing her completely exposed to me, and she did so, staring into my eyes. She was partially shaved. That awakened the malice that exists in every man and also in me. I began to sketch her silhouette on the canvas and stopped to admire every inch of her imposing beauty. How was it possible that she was letting me paint her like that, the two of us alone? It seemed like just another one of my fantasies, and for a moment I had to pinch myself to remember that it was real. "Do not move," I told her, and I felt like a wave of electricity run through my body. I was fascinated by the situation, and the fact that she was obeying me only added to the excitement. I knew immediately that my body was reacting to such stimulation. While I was painting, I enjoyed capturing her curves on the canvas, and I got closer a couple of times to better appreciate Martha's perfect bone structure, or so I told her, but I really just wanted to see her assets up close. It was driving me crazy. It was not the first time I had painted a woman without clothes, but never before had I felt so attracted to the model. The situation overwhelmed me, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as I made an effort to hide my excitement and not pounce on her. "I'd have seen how you look at me," she said suddenly, and I felt exposed. It was as if she had been listening to everything I was thinking up to that point. "I'm sorry, I find you particularly attractive. I know it's not appropriate, but seeing you delights me," I replied. "You don't have to apologize. For a mature woman like me, that's a compliment. Actually, it's been a long time since anyone had looked at me like that. It hasn't been easy for me to adapt to loneliness," she responded, and I sensed that she wanted me to come closer, so I did. Still with the brush in my hand, I approached her and began to slide the back of the handle along the entire contour of her figure, starting at her neck, continuing along her shoulder, and running along the curved lines of her guitar-shaped body. When I reached her hip, she grabbed my hand and pulled hard on me. At that moment, the inevitable happened. I let out my wild sigh that I had been repressing for too long. I began to kiss her passionately, but more than kissing her, I would say that I was devouring her. Her lips between mine felt like fresh water after spending several days in the desert. They were soft, warm, and fleshy. I couldn't resist biting them. I slid my tongue between them and ran my hands over her body, surprised by the softness of her skin. Although his muscles were firm, I preferred to focus on the softer parts, those that I could touch, hold, and squeeze as I pleased. That night, Lisa was at a medical conference, and we both knew she wouldn't be back until the next morning, which was unfortunate, as we weren't the least bit careful not to make noise. We just went with our instincts, completely leaving aside the fact that we are mother-in-law and son-in-law. That outburst of unbridled passion began on the couch, and judging by the strength with which she wrapped her legs around me, I'm sure she was looking forward to this encounter as much as I was. I made sure she felt desired, beautiful, and feminine throughout that night. I dedicated all my life force and gifts to satisfying her. It was obvious that I hadn't been with someone like that in a long time, but her experience was also evident, and I couldn't do anything but delight. Our bodies gave each other a break as the sun was about to rise, leaving us like a couple of rag dolls on the carpet. What we did was so intense that we slept for a couple of hours in that same place because neither of us had the strength to get up and go to bed. We reached ecstasy, and immediately afterwards, everything fell under its own weight. The next morning, Lisa returned home and greeted her mother with a hug as usual and me with a kiss on the lips, which I returned affectionately, of course. The dynamics at home and our life as the family that we are continued as normal from then on. But I know that Martha will never forget what we did in my painting studio that day, and neither will I. I finished the portrait of her body. I already had the image quite clear in my mind, but I gave it another face because I didn't want to put us in a complicated situation with Lisa. How nice it turned out, as inspiration finally returned. Lisa told me one afternoon when the painting was finished. "Yes, it seems like I just needed to give it time," I replied. "Mom, come see Eric's new creation," Lisa shouted, and immediately Martha looked towards the door. "It is simply fantastic. Congratulations," she told me, and I could assure you that I saw her wink at me, but I preferred to ignore it, although I still hope that we will repeat our meeting the other day. I will keep this secret to myself, and I hope my wife never finds out. What I did should not be an example for anyone. I know I am not a good person. Now I would like you to judge me and share your thoughts with me. What would you have done in my situation? If you want to know more similar confessions, I encourage you to hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you very much, and until next time.
Can we regret something, even when what we did felt good? My name is Clara, and I am a lawyer by profession. At 50 years old, I had a fairly predictable life. I was married to Alphonse, a successful banker with whom I had 2 children, ages 20 and 18. who no longer lived with us. Therefore, our daily routine was filled with quiet dinners and weekends at home. I couldn't say that I hated the calm that I had in my life, but I had to admit that when I reached my age, I felt that I had left many things behind without considering that the life of being married and a mother would completely absorb me, leaving me without knowing the woman who there was behind that. That Clara was a crazy daredevil who loved to travel and see new places, while at the same time, I became obsessed with every case that was handed to me at the law firm where I worked at the time. But after meeting Alphonse and enthralled by the wealth that he and his family possessed, I had to adopt a new version of myself. More submissive, more homely, more modest. Sometimes I used to wonder if the countless luxuries that my husband could give me were enough to make me happy with him and the life he had given me. Because if I had to be honest, for a long time, I no longer felt excited about waking up every day next to him. But then, one sunny afternoon, when it seemed like a day like any other, everything changed. That day, I attended a conference at the local university to which I had been invited because I was a distinguished graduate. The university was so changed that I walked aimlessly through its modern buildings, looking for the room where I would have to tell my experience to future lawyers who would take the same path as me. That's when my eyes met those of a handsome young man who seemed to be leading the other people. "Can I help you with something?" he asked as he approached me. "I'm just looking for the conference room," I said, seeing his charming smile. He was a young man in his early 20s, whose dark hair fell messily over his forehead, giving him a carefree but attractive air. His brown eyes sparkled with a mischievousness that I found interesting, because it gave him a jovial look, eager to take on the world. The boy was dressed in a white shirt that highlighted his tanned skin and tight jeans that showed off his athletic figure, especially 2 thick legs. His demeanor was relaxed but confident, as if he were used to drawing attention to himself effortlessly. "Are you here for the conference?" he asked. Immediately, my eyes returned to his face as a sly look appeared on him. There I blushed, realizing that I had looked too much at the boy in front of me, something that was not typical of the behavior of a married woman. I nodded. "Yes, I am the guest." Then his eyes widened so much it looked funny. "Are you Clara? The lawyer in the famous case of—" "Yes, I'm her." Our conversation quickly turned to my career, the achievements I had achieved during it, and the recognitions I had obtained in the cases I had worked on. While the boy was chattering, my heart sank as I realized how bitter the situation was. It had been a long time since my circle had stopped referring to me as Clara, the unstoppable lawyer, to be replaced by the title of Alpha's wife. I couldn't remember the last time I had been praised for my good work defending my clients, or the thrill of having someone recognize how good I had been. "My name is Martin, by the way," he said, extending his hand. "It is an honor to have you in this place." That interaction left an indelible impression on my mind. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about how his presence had ignited something inside me that had lain dormant for so long. That's why, motivated by meeting the handsome young man who had praised me, I took advantage of an afternoon when my husband wouldn't be home early to go back to that university. This time, I went straight to the law program office, looking of a certain Martin who had served me the previous week. I didn't know what I was doing, but I didn't stop to think about how crazy it was for a 50-year-old woman to track down a young man who could be her son. However, upon seeing Martin's smiling face in one of the classrooms, I forgot any judgment I had about it. "Clara!" he exclaimed, joining me quickly. "Martin, what a surprise to see you again," I responded enthusiastically, ignoring the fact that I had gone to the university expressly to look for him. Soon we sat down on one of the benches on campus and began to chat animatedly. Martin was gentlemanly, as he always made sure I had a drink or a snack next to me during our conversation. At first, we limited ourselves to talking about politically correct things. That's why I knew that he was 20 years old. He was studying his 3rd semester of law, and he was inspired by human rights defense cases. My heart was pumping with excitement as I noticed that we had many things in common, and that we were both passionate about the legal profession at a level that not even those close to us could understand. As the hours passed, however, our conversation grew closer, and before I knew it, we were sharing personal and almost private information. I didn't know why, but at one point, I came to share with him the reason why his words had moved me during our first meeting. He looked at me seriously. "Clara, would you like us to go for a drink?" At that point, my mind had become a mess with Martin's words. I didn't know exactly what I wanted from him, but I could sense that it wasn't just a conversation. The part of me that wanted to feel like a woman again had a clear goal. I just didn't know how to achieve it at that moment. We crossed the sidewalk to find a bar full of college students, one that no matter what day of the week it was always full. I knew it more than anyone, since that was where my classmates and I went to celebrate when we managed to pass the exams. The bar was lively and full of people, but Martin found a table in a quiet corner where we could talk in privacy. We ordered drinks and continued our conversation as if time had stopped, while the music around us varied between modern and electrifying, and old and romantic. As the minutes passed and the drinks took effect, I could feel the formalities fading away. There was a kind of electricity in the air that was impossible to ignore, a magnetic attraction that drew us to each other. But everything intensified when Martin extended his hand to me. "Shall we dance?" I looked at his hand. The background song was sensual, one of those that was fashionable in those days, and above all, one that forced us to dance to it with little distance between our bodies. I couldn't lie and say that I didn't hesitate to take it, mostly because I knew that if I did, there would be no turning back. A dance to that kind of music would destroy any kind of barrier we might or might not have tried to build before us. But I agreed. The softness of Martin's hand covered mine, while I carefully observed the difference in our hands, at the same time that I felt a pleasant pull that encouraged me to stand up. Soon, we were dancing on the floor, while I could feel some prying eyes on us. I didn't really know how to dance that rhythm, but I let my body take over. Anyway, Martin didn't seem to dislike my dancing, and that was the only thing that mattered. 2 songs passed before I could feel his breath hit the back of my neck, and the back of my body completely at his mercy. Furthermore, I knew that the movements we made had awakened his imposing friend, as I sensed the hardness with every step. I must get away, I thought. But at that moment, Martin leaned towards me and whispered in my ear in a hoarse voice, "Can I kiss you, Clara?" My heart fluttered in my chest, and my body froze, trying to find the right words to respond. For the first time since I had seen Martin again, I thought about my husband, my marital status, my children, everything we had built. I knew that what was about to happen was wrong, that I was betraying Alphonse's trust and jeopardizing my marriage. "Martin," I murmured, trying to put a stop to what was happening. However, before I could say anything else, his lips found mine in a kiss that left me breathless. My body squirmed a little, since I was in a complicated position. But the only thing my mind could think about was the wetness of Martin's tongue rubbing against mine. That instant felt like the entire world faded away around us, leaving just him and me in our little bubble. Without waiting any longer, Martin stopped the kiss, turned my body, and placed both hands on my shoulders. "If you don't stop me now, I'm afraid I won't later." My breathing was noisy. I thought again of the look on Alphonse's face, of his disapproval and anger if he discovered that his perfect wife had been unfaithful, of my children seeing me destroy the home they were born into. But contemplating the piercing gaze of the young man looking at me with desire, nothing mattered more than giving Clara the woman she deserved. "I'm not going to stop you." We left the bar holding hands, almost as if we were schoolboys, heading towards a motel that was next to the university. It was the first time I had entered a place like this, full of neon lights that paradoxically made the place go more unnoticed. In the room, the game was different. His hands explored my body with desperate urgency, while I let myself be carried away by the intensity of the moment, forgetting everything else except the sensations he made me feel with his lips. His expert tongue traveled through various parts of my body, giving each one the attention it deserved. But that was hardly proof of how crazy he would make me feel when I felt his warmth at my entrance with his huge friend, which pleasantly surprised me. My legs tried to close, looking for the friction that would make me reach my release. But Martin opened them wide as if he were tasting a delicacy. Soon, he entered that very spot to finally fill me. It felt painful in a pleasant way. And there, I remembered that it had been a long time since I had done anything with my husband. However, Martin wasn't feeling it, and had started an accelerated and deep rhythm that brought out the dirtiest sounds from me. I don't know how long it was before we separated, but when we finally did, we were panting and shaking. He had spilled into me, but I didn't care. We melted into another kiss, a more chaste one, which made us laugh from the adrenaline. I knew that what we had just done was wrong, that we had crossed a line we should never have crossed. But in that moment, all I could feel was the ecstasy of the moment and the sweet sensation of his body against mine. And so, for many years, Martin and I continued our dangerous game. When he graduated, I used my contacts to get him a job where he could demonstrate his skills. The condition was so simple that he agreed to complete it, make me feel like a woman. In the end, regretting something that had taken me to heaven was futile, and I knew I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. My husband and my family today do not suspect anything, fortunately for me, and now I would like to know your opinion. Would you understand my actions and why I did it? If you want more thought-provoking confessions, I encourage you to like the video and subscribe. Thank you very much, and until next time.
What has been your best Valentine's Day memory? For anyone, Valentine's Day is synonymous with love. Romantic dates under the moonlight, letters proclaiming mutual love, promises of love whispered in the ear and hearts in all their representations in every corner of the city. Valentine's Day is the proclamation of love in all its splendor and the perfect opportunity to show your love, at least if you had a partner. When your single romantic Valentine's Day plans don't make sense. The last few I have ignored the date as if it were a horrible day that I had to get out of my mind, convincing myself that all those couples who used Valentine's Day as an excuse to celebrate love were just stupid, that they were victims of marketing. But the reality is that I was envious, because Valentine's Day made me remember how much I wanted to live a love story, but not just anyone, but a story like the one in the movies that I liked so much, which portrayed a passionate and sincere love, a strong love that could cross the barriers of time no matter what. Unfortunately, those stories only existed in movies. In reality, women like me had to face the sad reality of not living a love story. However, reality can sometimes surprise, and that's what happened to me. My name is Barbara, and this is the story of how I found love in the hands of my neighbor, a man who does not believe in love. It all started when the concierge told me that the apartment next to mine would be occupied. I live in an apartment complex in the city of Chicago, and finding an apartment that is good, nice, and cheap is very difficult. The owner of the building had a reputation for helping college students, and that's how I was able to rent it 2 years ago when I still hadn't finished my college studies. So I imagined that the new tenant would be another student who, like me, had found contact with the owner of the apartment and had obtained a unique opportunity to live in a nice and comfortable place at an affordable price. Then Saturday morning arrived. I remember it well because first impressions can sometimes be disastrous, but the one I had when I saw the new tenant was worse, much worse. I remember it like it was yesterday. Since 8 in the morning, I had heard the engine of a van park in front of the apartment. My apartment faced the front of the apartment, so I could see the street from my living room balcony. A man got out of the van in the company of another, and then a motorized vehicle parked in front of the vehicle. To say that the appearance of the motorized one was menacing was an understatement. The man looked like something out of a thug movie from the 80s with that dominant demeanor. He was dressed in black from head to toe. When he got off the motorcycle, he took off his helmet, and the first thing I thought was that he must be the personification of the devil himself. He was tall, with light skin, and had long, straight, dark hair tied in a low ponytail. At that distance, I couldn't see the color of his eyes, but I had a feeling that they must be blue or gray. My heart pounded as I watched him talk to the moving staff, and as I was about to take a step back to stop snooping, he raised his head and looked right at my balcony. The weight of his gaze froze me, and I didn't know whether to say hello or pretend I wasn't seeing him. I opted for the second. The next encounter was even worse. I was cleaning the kitchen when someone knocked on my door with great force and insistence. I ran quickly, thinking it could be the janitor, but when I opened the door, it wasn't her. But the man he had seen in the morning, the motorized one, my new neighbor. My mind went blank as we looked at each other without saying anything. "Are you Barbara?" he asked in a bored tone. "How may I help you?" I replied. At that distance, I could see that his eyes were blue and that he had a strange and extensive tattoo that went from his collarbone to his jaw. The janitor told me that if she wasn't there, I could ask you about the goings-on here in the building, E said with a carefree air. "And what do you think?" "The concierge is not in her apartment, and I have a problem." "Wouldn't it be better if you wait for her?" I questioned, crossing my arms trying to hide the fact that I wasn't wearing a bra, but I didn't miss the opportunity to imitate his tone of voice and put on my best angry expression. He seemed to notice that he had bothered me, so for the first time he looked me up and down, and after finishing scanning my body, he raised an eyebrow and an insolent smile appeared on his face. "Oh, I caught you at the wrong time, didn't I?" he said. "What do you need?" I asked hurriedly, but trying to stay calm. If the janitor had said that I could help the new neighbor, no matter how threatening it seemed, it was for a reason. She trusted me. "Do you know how to turn on the heater? That device is older than this building," he muttered hastily, "and I need a shower." I nodded. "There's a switch in the guest laundry. Turn it on and wait half an hour before taking a bath," I explained. He nodded, but then raised an eyebrow with a knowing look on his face. "How do you know what's in my apartment?" he asked slowly. There was a spark in his eyes that I couldn't identify. "Your apartment is the same as mine," I answered bluntly. "Do you need anything else?" He denied and turned around, but just before he closed the door to my apartment, I heard him murmur, "Nice pajamas, neighbor." After that brief encounter, I had gotten an idea of the type of person my neighbor was. He was rude, bold, and had a look that could paralyze you. A few days later, I heard him talking to the concierge and discovered that his name was Joseph, but I didn't know anything else. I didn't know how old he was, what he was studying, if he had a partner, or if he liked dogs or cats. We would meet in the hallway when I was going out to throw out the trash, or in the elevator where we barely shared a greeting, but sometimes he would give me a look that I didn't know how to interpret. Sometimes the meetings were on our respective balconies when he went out to smoke and I went out to have the first coffee of the day. When I greeted him, he always smiled at me as if he knew something I didn't know. He never returned the greeting. His attitude made me irritated, so I tried not to find him anywhere, especially in the mornings when our schedules coincided. I was committed not to run into him. For some reason, I always ran away when I heard his door open as I was walking to the elevator, and although there was no logical reason for it, I knew deep down that it was because I was attracted to him, and I was terrified of what I was feeling. I didn't want to accept it, but every time I saw him smoking on the balcony of his apartment, that thought always came of, what if? If he wasn't so intimidating, if he hadn't been rude when we met, if he didn't make me feel like a scared little girl, maybe, just maybe, I would have tried to meet him. I knew that my attraction to him was only because he was handsome, because all those dark clothes he wore and the bully attitude couldn't mask the fact that he was hot. So for a while, I put him out of my thoughts, convincing myself that it was normal that I was attracted to him, and that I shouldn't worry because nothing would happen to him, because he wasn't the kind of man who starred in a love story, and I wasn't willing to give him that role in my life. Unfortunately for me, my suspicions were true. My neighbor was the antonym of love, the villain. That's how the next Valentine's Day arrived. I had gone out to buy ice cream at the store, and when I returned, I found my neighbor in the hallway of the apartment we shared. "What the hell is wrong with this stupid door?" the neighbor murmured, slurring his words a little. He bent down and grabbed the key again, but on his next attempt, he failed again, and the key was thrown towards the end of the hallway. "Need help?" I asked, a little unsure. He turned to me when he heard my voice. He looked at me as if he didn't know me at first, but then he laughed. "But look who's here," he said, then laughed. My cute and hot neighbor. I opened my mouth ready to reprimand him, but I realized that it didn't make sense. Joseph was drunk, so I chose to ignore it. I walked to my door and took out my keys, but as I went to open the door, I heard him calling me. "Hey, Barbara, don't go," he said. "It was just a joke. You don't need to make that face." I ignored him, but this time he spoke again. My mistake was not entering, because what would happen next was the first of many mistakes. "Did I do something to make you hate me?" he asked behind me. My heart pounded, and all I could think was that I had never heard his voice like that, so soft and husky. "I don't hate you," I answered seriously. "You're the one who seems to have a problem with me." He looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything, At that distance, I could smell the smell of alcohol combined with her perfume. "Well, you're not wrong about that," he said in a whisper, looking at me intensely. "But I think the culprit is your pajamas, or those see-through t-shirts you wear when sunbathing on your balcony. Or maybe that skirt you wore today. How do you do it? To see you this hot in such bland clothes." The smile he gave me shocked me. "Do you know how all this is arranged?" he asked, approaching me. "No," I murmured in a whisper. His gaze had caught me, and there was no way for me to move. As if in slow motion, I saw Joseph approach me like a viper about to bite. When we were an arm's length away, I couldn't hold it in anymore. Something exploded inside me, and sanity was left out of my mind. I want to think that everything I did afterwards was a product of alcohol, but the reality is that I had not drunk. And just as he had blamed my clothes, that night I blamed everything but the desire that screamed for him. To the obvious attraction I felt for him, and which I now realized was mutual. Joseph was tall, and to reach him I had to stand on tiptoe. He cornered me against the door while kissing me. I had never experienced such a pleasant and electrifying sensation. When his hands began to explore my sides, the last trace of common sense I had disappeared. I dropped the bag with the ice cream and surrendered to the kiss. The kiss was fiery and wet. His hands left a hot trail every time he touched me, and soon the kiss wasn't enough. From one moment to the next, we ended up entering my apartment, and what had started at the door continued on my kitchen counter. Joseph seemed quite lucid when he took off my clothes, and when it was his turn to get rid of all those dark layers that covered his body, I delighted in the complex patterns on his skin. Up close, my neighbor was a man turned into sin. That night, Joseph taught me things I had never experienced. His hands had touched me slowly at all times, as if he wanted to memorize every part of my body. He did it to me with his mouth, with his fingers, and then with his manhood. Hungry. The next morning I woke up alone, with the memory of his kisses and the sad reality that what had happened was just a one-night stand. But I was wrong. 2 days later, I met Joseph after not hearing anything from him. We didn't greet each other, but the moment the elevator doors closed, Joseph caught me in his arms and we did it again. After the third time, I knew I couldn't expect anything more from these encounters. Joseph was attracted to me. I could tell by the way he always did it to me. So hard, so dedicated, as if being inside me was the most wonderful thing in the world. But at the same time, she knew he wasn't looking for anything else. In his world, there was no room for love, only for fleeting pleasure. For fleeting encounters, on the emergency stairs while he did it to me from behind, on the couch in his apartment or the hallway. I never invited him to have coffee in the morning, to chat about us like two normal people who are getting to know each other. And I knew the reason. There was no us. What united us was pleasure, and I knew that wouldn't last forever either. The day our meetings ended, Joseph had taken me against the door with a frenzy that moistened my center in an instant. He had hiked the dress up to my waist and pulled down his pants quickly as if he couldn't wait any longer. We couldn't take it anymore, and I kept asking him to do it, that I wanted him and that I wanted him to be rough. "You like it like that?" he whispered in my ear. "Ask me, beg me to give it to you, Barbara." But the pleasure was so great that he couldn't speak. My body just moved in sync with him. He was radical, pulling my hair back to expose my neck and exploring the sweaty skin with the tip of his tongue. He made me peek twice in a row, and when my legs began to feel weak from the waves of pleasure coursing through my body, he picked me up and carried me to his apartment. That was the first and last time he took me to his room. After that day, Joseph stopped talking to me. The few times we met, he completely ignored me, and when we had to meet with the janitor, he acted as if nothing had happened between us, as if he hadn't made me his so many times. What had started one night in the middle of Valentine's Day had ended abruptly. Perhaps the love story I had been looking for so much was just a few steps away, outside my apartment, and it had a first and last name. I didn't know whether to consider Joseph as the protagonist of this brief story of passion that we had shared, but what I did know was that I would never forget what I felt when he made me his. Joseph would forever be my best and worst Valentine's Day memory. And would you dare to live such a passionate romance with a neighbor you just met? If you like the story, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much, and until next time.